First of all, I would like to thank you all and for coming and welcoming you all to the Tizard's first seminar for this academic year anyway. And just wanted to say that we're all very excited today because it's two people from the Tizard team that are here today to present their work. Professor Rachel Forrester-Jones and Dr. Magali Barnoux. And before I let them start and talk to us about clothes and fashion and the challenging and changing world of intellectual and developmental disabilities, I think I should share with you all some information about our presenters. Don't look at me like that. So Magali has been with us in the Tizard Centre since 2013 as a researcher. And I know today that she will be talking to us all about clothes and fashion, but her real interest and passion lies in forensic psychology, and to be more precise, it lies with fire setters. And this is what her PhD was about, isn't it? So she's currently working with us in a 3-year project with Dr. Peter Langdon, and where they're looking at people with autism detained in hospitals. And even though Magali, you know, she's very good and she's done very well since her PhD and being involved in forensic and being involved in many projects now in the Tizard Centre, but she did not always have an academic background. So some of you will be surprised to know that she's also a qualified financial advisor, and that she worked in the insurance industry in Ireland for a few years, and then she turned life around and into forensic psychology. So a big win for us, really. And apart from being very good at finance, she's also very good at horse riding. And sometimes on a Friday afternoon, I must say, that she makes an appearance in the office wearing her job purse. That's been known to. Yes, so if you want to capture that view, you need to be there on a Friday afternoon. And another interesting fact is that until recently, Magali and Rachel were neighbours. That's really interesting. It's inside information that you don't really know. And here comes you, Rachel. So Rachel joined Tizard in 1998. And she did her postdoc then. And she stayed with Tizard ever since. And early on this year, she became the director of Tizard. And all these years, Rachel has produced over 150 articles and 2 books. As most of you already know, Rachel is also, she's a sociologist and quite an expert in qualitative research. And her area of expertise is social inclusion, social networks, and mental health. And she recently spent some time in Brazil, and we're all really jealous about. And she was developing the social networks for people with learning disabilities. We want some proof. But her work has been so influential that the government actually invited her to help write up the mental health and social exclusion report that was sent to all UK social services. And apart from an excellent career in academia, Rachel is also a qualified barrister. And I really don't know how she manages everything. But not many people know that she's also a very good stand-up comedian. And she made her debut at Margate Comedy Festival in 2014. And I hear that she also plays tennis, or she really tries. And she really likes cats. As a matter of fact, at the time being, she has a shared cat with 4 of her neighbours, and I hear that the cat is really, really fat. So that's you in a nutshell. Anytime. And now I just would like to invite you to present the research on clothes, fashion, and the changing world of intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Thank you very much, Vivi. Okay, thank you so much for staying today and coming to this presentation. This research project was funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we worked very closely with Escapement. I don't know if Jane Brooker's got here. She was travelling from Sittingbourne today, but she was the East Kent MenCap collaborator. We start with a picture of Madeline Stewart, an 18-year-old model from Brisbane, Australia, who has Down syndrome. Maddie, as she likes to be called, is making headline news. She uses mainstream social media as a fashion model, and she wants to challenge the way people think about intellectual disabilities and disability discrimination. Maddie has visual agency through social media, and this really reflects other remarkable changes in the lives of people with IDD in the last 20 or so years in particular, and society's response to those individuals. In terms of social policy changes, of course, the Community Care Act in 1990 was the last nail in the coffin of institutional type of care. So people were moved out of institutions into more community living. And then we've had Valuing People in 2001 and Valuing People Now in 2009, promoting ideology, if you like, but ideals of choice, individuality, and empowerment. Huge impacts on people with IDD. Also, the rise of postmodernism and more sort of post-structuralist views, including social construction, as opposed to the medical model, and the rise of more different types of feminism, acknowledging the historical subordination of women through clothes, yes, but now willing to accept how dress can play a role in self-fashioning and recognising the aesthetic pleasure that clothes can bring women in particular. So changes there. At the same time, Professor Julia Twigg, who's also been involved in this study, has been writing extensively about how age and fashion sit uncomfortably. So fashion, in a sense, inhibiting women through a world of youthful beauty and fantasy that's not quite attainable as we get older. Age linked to grey in colour and restricted opportunities. And Julia shows how questions of age can expand the remit of fashion studies. So using all of these ideas, we kind of got together with East Kent MenCap and Jane Brooke, who's just arrived, to look at how dress and fashion might be important in the lives of people with IDD. Is this a valid research project? Is this a valid topic for talking about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? Well, clothes do embody our lived memories, you could argue. They remind us of our past lives and our past relationships. They're triggers for memory. We remember the scarf that we wore to our first football match. We remember the scarf we wore for our first date, the treasured glove that we left on the train, the t-shirt we wore to our first rock concert. Dress is also entwined with our own identity. It expresses who we are or who we would like to be. It's also one of the ways in which social difference is made concrete and visible. So, for example, people have written about class and gender, ethnicity, sexuality and age, but there's less work on disability in general, and there's even less work on people with IDD in relation to this topic. And the focus of social policy has really been in relation to obscuring difference, hasn't it, between people with IDD and the general and the ordinary populations, rather than expressing it. If we think about the history of people with IDD in relation specifically to clothes, in the days of institutions, people with IDD were often made to wear clothes that didn't belong to them and actually didn't fit them. This was all part of kind of Goffman's depersonalization of people with IDD. No choice of clothes, no new clothes, no fashionable clothes. People sometimes wore the same outfits for 20 years. Now, I have to have a caveat to this, of course, because I know certainly I've got clothes that I've been wearing for the last 20 years. Certainly I've got a suit at home that I realised only recently, gosh, I've had that for 20 years. And I certainly know some of my colleagues at the university have been wearing the same clothes for 20 years because I've observed it. So, however, that's their choice and that's my choice. But was that the choice of people with IDD in those institutions? People with IDD didn't often get to go shopping for clothes, the cathartic relationship that we have with clothes shopping. This all added, you could argue, to the social death of people with IDD, the living but the socially dead in society. And whilst normalisation and social role valorisation, yes, has encouraged people with IDD to living in the community to buy clothes for themselves and enter mainstream fashion, we know, don't we, that sometimes staff really, in reality, choose the clothes for the people that they are caring for. And we know that sometimes parents of people with ID are scared that their adult children might express their own sexuality through dress. And so they will prefer to keep them or to choose clothes for them that are infantile and childish or overly formal. This, you could argue, is a misinterpretation of normalisation. But there is the idea that clothes are one way in which people with IDD can express their individuality and personhood, just like we like to express our own personhood through the clothes that we wear. There has been work on age and in particular on dementia and how clothes and memories of clothes can be used to enable individuals to express their former selves. So we looked around for the existing literature on this topic in relation to people with IDD, and a systematic review revealed that whilst there were wider literature relating, yes, to fashion, clothes, dress embodiment, identity, memories and heritage, there was virtually nothing in relation to fashion and clothing on IDD. And in fact, we found only these two studies, the first one by Nisbet and Johnson, an older study now in 1992, that looked really about the perceptions of university students looking at a student with a disability in relation to fashionable and unfashionable clothes. The results suggested that for female students with a disability, wearing unfashionable clothing could be detrimental when others were forming impressions of mental competence. The second paper by Watson et al. 2010 was an exploratory study of 10 caregivers into the role of fashionable clothing and how that plays an important part in the normalisation process. They found that fashionable clothing and attention to grooming were perceived to aid the normalisation process and help facilitate positive perceptions from others, but very discrete papers there. So the aim of our sort of little study, this participatory action research, was to explore dress and fashion from a heritage point of view, allowing individuals with IDD to reflect on their own changing world, their own changing experiences through embodied memories of dress. And in so doing, we hoped to record those memories from them and to disseminate them to the local community.
Okay, so in terms of our participants, 23 individuals were approached and asked to take part in a series of reminiscence workshops which were aimed at talking and reminiscing around fashion and clothing. Of those 23 that agreed to take part, we had 4 informal family carers, we had 3 members of paid staff, and we had 16 people with IDD, 7 were male and 8 were female. We had quite a broad age range, so we ranged from 28 years to 78 years with a mean age of around 57, and all our participants were Caucasian. Of those with IDD, most of them had a range of very complex needs, and nearly half of them, or most of them, would have had comorbid medical conditions, which included learning disabilities, dementia, mental health problems, and also physical disabilities. Most of the participants with IDD were, at the time of the workshops, living in assisted living arrangements, either with paid staff or family members. And the majority are in some sort of gainful employment. So 9 were either in paid employment or doing some voluntary work. 6 were actually unemployed at the time, and 1 was retired. And nearly everyone was regularly engaging in meaningful activities. So that was things like socialising, going to the pub, going shopping, or doing some sports like going swimming and so on. In terms of the reasons for attending the workshops, we had a variety of reasons as to why people wanted to do this bit of work with us. So the staff and the carers wanted to reminisce around fashion and clothing. They wanted to see how people with IDD recalled the past, and they also wanted to support people with IDD. And in terms of the participants with IDD, they also wanted to talk about fashion and clothing. One person wanted to experience something different from their day-to-day routine. Some wanted to meet some new people and make some new friends. One person wanted some help remembering the past, and quite a few just wanted to talk about their past experiences. In terms of the workshops themselves, so we gained ethical approval from the university here, and all our participants had capacity to consent in line with the ethical guidelines outlined in the Mental Capacity Act. Everyone was given an information sheet which outlined the purpose of the study and the information of what we were asking them to do. And ongoing informed consent was obtained on a regular basis. And we also obtained consent to use pictures and video clips from the workshops. So we organised 6 two-hour workshops which focused on fashion and dress through the decades, and each participant was asked to attend 2 sessions. The workshops themselves were facilitated by 2 members of staff from East Kent MEMCAP. We have one here, who's Amy, who's in the corner. And they were both trained in delivering reminiscence work with people with IDD. And we also had a member of the UKC research team attend. That was usually either myself or Rachel. So Amy and Leslie, the facilitators, brought along some memory boxes, which they were lent to us by a library in the southeast. And those are boxes which contained items of clothing, accessories, hats, fashion items, magazines, and so on. And everyone was also asked to bring along their favourite item of clothing or an item of clothing which held a special memory for them. In terms of the structure itself, so Amy and Leslie opened up the workshops with some formal introductions and also explained how the workshop was going to work. Generally speaking, they were designed to be very unstructured and quite informal, though everyone was asked to keep the discussion around fashion and dress. Then participants were asked to each present their favourite item of clothing and why they bought it, and that was really kind of an icebreaker to open up the conversation. And then we opened up the memory boxes, got the items out, and asked everyone to think about any memories associated with those items and just trying to talk about, you know, what fashion and clothing meant to them. At the end of the workshop, everyone was thanked and they were reminded of the date of their second workshop, and we asked them to complete a short questionnaire which contained basic demographic information. All the workshops were recorded on a digital audio recorder and they were transcribed verbatim or as close to as possible. And we undertook thematic analysis. So thematic analysis is a process, it's a qualitative method which aims to look at themes arising from the data, particularly using what we call coding. So you would code what people are saying into different themes. In practice, so the workshops were held across different locations in the southeast. So we had some that were held in a community library, some were in residential homes, some were held at East Kent MEMCAP itself. And what we tried to do was generally get everyone sat round a table, as you can see here, with all the items laid out. Some people chose to hang up their clothes that they bought and stand up and talk about them. And as I said, the workshops lasted 2 hours and everyone got a 20-minute break in between. And then at the end of the 6 workshops, East Kent MEMCAP held a final event. This was really a celebration of the project. So everyone who'd taken part was invited to come along. And it was a little party for the workshops. We had stands with clothing and magazines on it. We had a slideshow with photos. We had some music. There was tea and cake. And it was a really fun morning, actually. It was really good. So thank you to Amy and Jane and everyone for organising it. So in terms of the results, so thematic analyses yielded 4 overarching themes which came out of the 6 workshops. And the first one was really around fashion and clothing triggering past memories, both positive and negative. So what really came out was that when people were talking about clothing and fashion, this seemed to bring out memories of personal experiences in the past, particularly around affective events, whether that was a good event or a bad event. So the clothes themselves weren't actually particularly important. They acted as a function to trigger past memories, and it was those memories that were really what was important to people. Positive memories, there were some very common ones that came out, so things like holidays, travel and parties. So people talked about what they used to wear when they went to discos at school. Festive periods and seasons, so Halloween costumes and Christmas jumpers came out quite a bit. Different music eras, so disco, punk and rock and roll actually. Film and television, so Christmas films, television shows, what famous actors used to wear. Different leisures and hobbies, so like brownies, dancing and acting. School and jobs, so school uniform was quite a big theme that came out. Special occasions as well, so weddings and birthdays, a lot of people spoke about their wedding dresses. I think, Amy, you did quite a bit. And also their loved ones. So some people, certain items reminded them of loved ones that had passed away. So things like perfume, that reminded them of some people who had passed away. So a good example was one of our participants came to a workshop wearing a T-shirt that they'd bought on holiday. They went on a holiday to America, and they came wearing the T-shirt. And that holiday was a great time for them, and they said it was the best holiday ever. I feel comfortable wearing clothes from the holiday because it reminds me of being there. So just wearing that T-shirt reminded her of what a great time she had. She was visiting family, and it made that person feel really happy. In terms of more negative memories, some clothes and fashion did bring up some more negative events. School uniform was actually one that came out as quite negative. So for instance, one person spoke about how they were repetitively bullied on the bus on the way to school because of their school uniform, because it wasn't very pretty. And others talked about their dislike of their school uniform, not just about the negative affect associated with it, but also tangible discomfort. So this individual said, I used to wear a black and grey school uniform, which I hated. When I got out of school, I wore jeans, T-shirts, and that was me. So it wasn't all just about emotion, it was also about physical discomfort that certain items of clothing actually brought out. In terms of the second theme, so this was around wider associations made from fashion and clothing in terms of history and culture. So conversations around clothes from the different decades really help people recall certain eras. So when we were speaking about the 50s and the 60s, people often said miniskirts in the 60s or platform shoes and flares from the 70s, but also historical events. So we had some items like Union Jack hats, which reminded people of the Queen's Jubilee celebrations, street parties and so on. And also experiences of living in foreign countries. So one individual spoke at length about wearing saris in Africa and how that made them feel, especially when it was really hot, it was very uncomfortable and so on. And this gentleman here, he spoke about the clothes that he used to wear from the decade he was born. So I was born in 1972. I like the clothes from that year, like the leather jacket. So really that leather jacket was about the decade that he was born in, and he was very fond of it. Our third theme was around fashion and clothing as an expression as personal identity, and this really was quite a big one. So came out that clothes and fashion were an important part of individuals' personal identities. So certain types of clothes were really seen for people with IDD as a means of expressing who they were. And particularly this was around certain items that were worn for things like clubs and societies, so brownies, drama and dancing, employment. So one individual actually came to the workshops dressed in their chef whites, and that was because they loved that job, that made them feel important, and it sort of made them, that was part of their identity. But also sporting activities. So one individual was very fond of horse riding, and they spoke at length about the riding hat and the jodhpurs, and that that made them feel normal like everyone else because other people also did horse riding. And then finally, our final theme is really around fashion and clothes as an expression of personal choice. So there were two elements to this. The first one was really around the importance of being able to choose their own clothes. So personal choice in terms of clothing was extremely important to people with IDD. And what came out was that there was a progressive change in attitudes from childhood to adulthood. So often when people with IDD were younger, they didn't have much choice in what they were able to wear. And that often came, so it was often their primary caregivers that chose for them. For example, someone said, one individual who grew up in the 1950s said that they didn't have a favourite dress because they wore what they were told to wear. And this lack of choice, growing up as children, was often associated with feelings of anger, frustration, unhappiness and awkwardness. And for a number of people, those feelings were linked to the quality of their relationship with their primary caregiver. And often, if their primary caregiver was telling them what to wear and was forcing them to wear things they didn't like, that relationship wasn't very positive. So, for instance, we had one individual who said, when I was that age, my mum chose my clothes. I threw a shoe in her face. I didn't want to wear that. What she wanted to give me. I didn't get any food that night. I stayed in bed. That was actually quite sad. But also in terms of personal choice, that seemed to change as they got older. People expressed having more choice, and that was associated with more positive feelings of being able to progress, and also associated with how other people see you. So being able to choose what you wore in terms of fashion and trends was also trying to get a positive reaction from others. So one person said, you seem to notice what people are wearing and you always compliment people on what they're wearing and you like them to notice what you're wearing. It makes you feel happy. So also that positive reinforcement from others complimenting what you're wearing also came out quite strongly. And then the second element to this theme was really about the functions of choosing clothes, so how they chose their clothes or why they chose their clothes. And there are a couple of things that came out here. One was financial constraints. So some people spoke about not having enough money to buy expensive clothes. So one individual said, I go for bargains, I don't get much money. But also dress size came out, limited availability for maybe larger dress sizes. And that was quite a negative feeling because this person felt that, you know, not all the trendy shops catered for larger dress sizes. There's also practicality and personal appearance. The main function of choice of clothing was really for practical reasons, so for warmth and dryness and so on. So one person said, I've always preferred trousers, otherwise your legs need shaving when wearing a dress or a skirt, and if you wear trousers, nobody can see that. But also it was about fashion, so a lot of them wanted to be young and trendy, and that was very important, and also about how the clothes made them feel. So increasing self-esteem by choosing things that they perceived as pretty or as fashionable or as nice. So things like saying I felt like a princess in my party dress, or it suited me or made me feel special, that came out quite a bit as well as reasons for choosing certain items of clothing. I think that's it.
So we didn't really know what to expect from this study at all. We wondered if it was just going to be a bit of a red herring, whether or not it would be a goer, whether people would enjoy it or not. We found that actually we all enjoyed it, I think, especially as researchers, because a lot of the research that we do, we have to be honest, is kind of a bit of doom and gloom. There's a lot of negativity in terms of the findings, you know, that unfortunately come out of the research that we do, because that's the reality of it. But this, we really did enjoy it, and we know that the participants enjoyed it as well. And quite often, you know, you'd be forgiving to say to me, Rachel, why are you doing this? It's a bit of a frivolity, it's a frivolous kind of topic, fashion, there's more important things to be researching. But actually, what this project found was that in a situation where people with IDD normally have an overarching identity, and that is the identity of having an IDD, that fashion and clothing do actually provide one way in which they can have a multiple identity, something else, that they can be who they are, and it's important to them. It's important to how they perceive themselves. It's important to how they feel about themselves. It's important in terms of self-esteem. So it's a quality of life part of us, and it's a quality of life issue. And secondary to that, of course, is choice and empowerment, because that's bound up in the tangible items such as clothes. We also conclude that heritage as a concept and practice is also helpful for exploring identity and past identity and memories, and also furthering our own understanding of this largely marginalised group of individuals. So heritage projects involving dress should perhaps be replicated to other client groups and regions. And this was a very small study. It was an exploratory study in a way. And so we would like to really replicate this in a larger setting. Many of us from the Tizard Centre went to the IACID conference in Melbourne. We only recently got back. And we're very pleased to say that our poster, which we went all out to kind of display it, as you can see, and to totally entwine the poster with fashion on a t-shirt and a bag. But we actually won the Quality of Life Poster Award at IACID, so we're just very pleased about that. That was very, and of course the first time that fashion as a concept and as a research study has been talked about and presented at the IACID conference. And now we're going to have Amy Johnson, who was the facilitator of the workshop, and Joyce Marsh are going to come up and just say a little bit about their experiences of this, because of course all of this research, is very important that it's kind of evaluated in some way from the participants' point of view. So we'd like to just invite you up for a few minutes just to share some of your experiences of the actual research from your point of view. So Amy was one of the facilitators and Joyce was one of the participants.
So as Magali and Rachel said, we took part in just a one-day training session with Kent Libraries, and they used their memory boxes to show us how to deliver reminiscence workshops with people, and this could be done with any group of people really. We then, Leslie and I then, and with Jan and other people at work, we then planned like the 6 workshops that we were going to do and invited people to come along that were over 45. We had 1 or 2 people that were younger as well, and with an intellectual and developmental disability, and we invited them to, like as Maggie said, bring along something with them. Some people didn't, which was in itself quite interesting, because it was, some people didn't have favourite clothes, or didn't have memories attached to the clothes that they were wearing at all, so it was quite interesting. And yeah, we just listened to what people had to say. It was quite sad to hear lots of people that didn't have choice in what they were wearing up, or either through money or because other people were making those choices for them. But at the same time, it was nice to hear that people, once they had those freedoms, either by living in sort of more of a supported setting instead, were then wearing whatever they wanted. They just took that opportunity and ran with it, Some people bought photographs. Joyce, you bought some photographs with you, didn't you, to the workshops? Mm-hmm. Yes. And those photographs were of places that you'd been on holiday and people that you grew up with. And it got you very interested in talking about your life and your life story, didn't it? And Joyce actually then went on to find volunteer and wrote her life story as a sort of, you'd done some research, hadn't you, into your family tree, but so it was an area of interest, but the reminiscence workshops actually sparked that off for you, didn't it? And you found Linda, your volunteer, and they worked together for about 18 months, finding out all about your life and lots of research. And you've got your, yeah. Joyce has brought her book along with her to show as proof. She wrote her life story. So that was a really great outcome for us as well as support workers, to sort of see you going on this journey. But we had loads of great feedback from people. There was times when it felt a little bit stressful because you're arranging, workshops with people and trying to find venues and things. But we had such good feedback from people that really enjoyed being able to talk about their memories and be listened to, and a real interest in what they had to say, and whether that was good or bad. I mean, we had one person, we passed around lots of photos of like fashion trends. So there was things like, punks and, the 80s in general, the 90s and shell suits and stuff. But some pictures went around of like teddy boys, and someone said, who I thought would enjoy that look, I showed him, and he said, oh no, the teddy boys used to shout at me and chase me, because he said because I was different, they used to chase me, and it had really bad sort of connotations for him. And it was something I never would have considered. Like, I thought he'd really, I don't know, I just didn't consider it. So that was, it was interesting for us to hear that there were certain groups of people that they would try to avoid, depending on what clothes they were wearing, because they were more likely to be mean to them. The other thing we found since the workshops is like 2 of the participants have passed away, and it's sort of to think that if we hadn't have had the reminiscence workshops and heard what they had to say then, that we may not have heard that from them, it sort of brings home the importance of listening to people and asking them what their experiences are, and hearing what they have to say, and realising that it's different, very different to us in some cases, and appreciating what people have been through has been one of the biggest things I took out of it as a support worker through running the workshops. So it was a big learning thing for me. So you enjoyed it, didn't you? Yeah. So I think that's it really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's time for questions now. Any questions? Raise your hand, but also having your choice. Yes?
I've not a question really, but when I first sort of read about this project, like on 3 occasions, like working as a support worker, there have been issues to do with whether someone's allowed to wear a certain item of clothing. So I had one client that wanted to buy a pink jacket, a bright pink jacket, and he was very specific that he wanted the brightest pink jacket in the shop. And he went back to the home and was told by the staff that he could not possibly wear that pink jacket out around Hackney because it would invite abuse or comments from passers-by. And like on several occasions, like working with learning disabilities, I've come across incidences like that when the staff have been scared to let someone wear something because they're worried that the reaction it will provoke from people like passers-by in the community might be harmful to the person because that person would not have the skills maybe to deal with the abuse it might generate. So I think there was like a ballet dress that one man wanted to wear and a pink hat that a man wanted to wear as well. And so it's not really a question, but just a comment that I've come across some occasions when people have had issues where what they wanted to wear, the staff have just been scared that they wouldn't be able to go out in the community and that they might be abused in the community for wearing it. So it's just an observation.
I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that.
Yes, this reminds me a little bit of some of the other discussions around age appropriateness. Trying to remember from way back where we had young women in school whose favourite toy was a very soiled pink rabbit thing that she used to just not carry everywhere. And it's not, I think very often it's presented as a kind of all or nothing, but actually all of us, when we buy clothes, there are places where we will wear some things and not others. So I think it's quite interesting why nobody thought about exploring with them. Well, let's think about where the pink jacket looks absolutely fantastic and you look gorgeous, but it might be some places that are really good to wear it, and others, it's like you don't wear your pajamas outside. So that it actually provides opportunities to start unpacking things and understanding the social mores, I think, which will obviously not taken in this case. And I think there would be various reasons why you might not do that time being wanted.
I think we came to a compromise where he could buy a jacket that was pink on the inside. Which made me a little bit sad.
What, wear it inside out when he wanted to? I mean, I think this all kind of it brings up the kind of whole normalisation debate, doesn't it, on what is normal and the misinterpretation of normals. And actually thinking about pyjamas, you know, if you're a second year student at the University of Kent, you may well wear your pyjamas, certainly down in certain contexts of the university. I know that, and I've seen that, and also even to the nightclub. So, I mean, you know, it is an interesting thing, and I think that this again highlights this whole area of clothes needs to be kind of maybe more researched and discussed a lot more. So, I think there was a question here.
I just wondered if there plans to roll it out on a wider scale, because it seems like such a valuable.
Yeah, I think we've been having discussions, haven't we, Jane? Or we're going to have more discussions about it. It's all to do with funding as well, of course, about how you put these on. And I have to say, Amy was very, very good value for money. Amy's actually a Tizard student.
I wasn't then.
She weren't then, but well now. This is how we recruit, of course. So you know. Yes.
I think it goes, you know, the whole thing with age appropriateness. I think that's the thing. In the workshops, there were people at the workshops that really wanted to wear things, and I think, like you said, staff are scared about putting them at risk by allowing them to wear something when actually it's their choice anyway. But I do think there's something to be said for people that have been sheltered from or not been given choice their whole lives, and the rest of us maybe would have gone through that rebellious fashion phase in our teens or early 20s and worn whatever we want and wouldn't have cared. And actually, some people have been denied that because they were never given that choice growing up, because they were sheltered so much from the outside world and being able to make choices. And you sort of, you know, I don't know, it is definitely something that needs to be considered when supporting adults, you know, because they're entitled to make those choices, you know, albeit risky ones.
And it sounds like it's more about the impact on staff, isn't it? What the impact is going to be on staff. What as a member of staff, am I going to have to go out and walk with this person with the bright pink
and also,
jacket?
if something happens, is it going to come back on screen?
Yeah.
Am I going to get sort of, why did you let them wear that? You know.
There was a question at the top. Yeah.
I was wondering, was there any participants that were part of any countercultures? Is that
What do you mean?
Depends how you define counterculture.
I don't know, like goth and punk, punks.
No, there were rockers, weren't there?
Yeah, so we had a few, punk. There was a couple who were really quite into punk, so there was leather jackets and the biker boots, and there was a lot of praising for David Bowie. Those are the ones that came out spring to mind.
I think that would be a really interesting research, though, about counterculture and how and whether or not people with IDD access those countercultures and whether they're accepted within those cultures. I think that would be quite interesting.
I'm from Brighton, and I work with quite a few people that are part of like the music scene in Brighton, and there's a big kind of IDD music scene, and there's quite a few punks that I work with, and it really informs their sense of identity and ties them not only to a culture of, you know, being part of the IDD music scene, but being part of this wider counterculture that really kind of lets them access other areas of like social life that don't really.
So you do the MSc?
MSc.
So have you chosen a dissertation project? That sounds great, and we'll supervise you. Oh no, we have to. Vivi decides on that.
I just wanted to sort of make a comment based around the choice element that Amy mentioned. And it seems it's quite interesting because there is a balance to be had between allowing or encouraging somebody to make a choice for themselves, but also to kind of ensure their safety, if you like. And I was only talking to a couple of my colleagues or students earlier about the radio clip that's been put on the website that Professor Murphy.
Radio 4, yeah.
Yeah. I was listening to that yesterday, and it's kind of.
So I was like, it's just alerting them to the fact that you're in.
Sorry, I've never met you, so. But it was quite interesting because there was quite a big issue around people. Well, there is a big debate about what's safe, and there was a crisis for all these women who were being sexually abused. And what do? Do you allow them to kind of go through that and make those choices, or do you kind of try and safeguard them? And it kind of covers that bigger aspect, if you like.
Do you want to respond to that, Professor Murphy?
I can't actually remember what the clip's about.
It was about people, women with learning disabilities being targeted by men for sex, I think, isn't it?
I imagine it was about capacity to consent to sexual relationships, which essentially is defined by law. So whatever we might think of it, you sometimes get, or I sometimes get asked to apply the law in relation to particular individuals with IDD, and it's usually in a situation where someone's been sexually abused, and the issue is whether they couldn't consent, and therefore it would be an offence, or whether they chose not to consent, in which case they have to go through pretty much the same court experience that anybody else would go through. So it is a big issue, but to be honest, and you may disagree with me, I think, if anything, the law is somewhat too liberal and not protective enough for women with learning disabilities, because I just see so many cases of people who've been abused who then try to go through courts to have the perpetrator convicted, and very few of them are successful. And it's usually around issues of capacity to consent.
Yeah, I think that is outside of the dress remit, though, isn't it? Because that happens whatever. I mean, because the comment was really about what dress. I think you're more or less saying what dress people are. Is that what you were intimating?
It was more around the issue of choice making and saying that we encourage people.
I mean, it is a really difficult issue because you don't set the criteria for capacity so high that people lose their right to a sexual relationship, and yet we all know how common abuse is. And so judging exactly where it should be is really, really difficult. And I think, in a way, although we're talking about clothing, it is a similar issue. The issue of should you be allowed to choose to wear your pink jacket, or should the fact that you're likely to be abused if you go around packing in it mean that you should be guided not to wear it? It is a very similar issue.
But it sounds like there's balances to be had then.
There are balances to be struck, and it is tricky. But I think, was it Amy who said that one of the important issues in a way is that lots of people with IDD haven't had the chance to experiment in their teenage years. As teenagers, we probably all had sex with people we rather regretted to look back later.
Speak for yourself.
There's one more question.
Let's round this up.
Going to the sexual theme, did you find any instances of people dressing, talking about sexualized clothing? Because I was very proud. I work for a support provider as well, and I was very proud of our staff. They contacted the department I worked in because they stood up to a family member who said that their daughter couldn't wear a dress. Their daughter was in her 30s, and she had a very tight silver dress, and you could see. And she said she wanted to wear it to the disco. She wanted to look sexy. And what the staff said was, they said no, take it off her, and they said no, that's what she's chosen to wear. And it's not because, you know, often you see people with not dressed very sexy. She looked cracking in it. So.
Well, there were certainly a few conversations around that theme from maybe some of the carers and the staff. I do believe I remember one story about someone wearing a mini dress and being told to go back upstairs and change. But with people with IDD, no, that didn't really come out. Certainly not the sexualized element to dressing not for that purpose, but to dress to, you know, in a sort of sexualized manner. No, that unless I've forgotten any, but I don't recall anything like that coming out in particular.
There's extroverts out there everywhere, and we've all been to the club and gone, what the hell is she wearing? What did they not look in the mirror this morning? And we've all made those judgments. But it takes a really nasty person to stop and actually bully somebody over what you're wearing. And yeah, those things might come up when you're out supporting somebody, but you kind of just have to, as a support worker, just forget about it. But that's just a choice issue for, you know, the things that we don't think are appropriate to wear. I had an experience when I first started as a support worker where I went to help somebody get dressed, support them to choose their clothes. I chose every single item of clothes. He looked absolutely fine. It was maybe a little bit less formal than he'd usually wear, as I recall. And an older support worker came in and said, "Oh my God, what have you put him in that for? He can't go out like that," and we dressed him. And these things, and that was, you know, 15 years ago, which isn't that long ago. So yeah, just wanted to share that because that will always stick with me. Because why should you wear a suit every day just because it's a safe day?
I was wondering whether there'd been any research on choice, because I'm an adult ed teacher for adults with learning difficulties, and I know that as teachers we sometimes judge the providers when we see learners from certain homes coming in very shabbily dressed from charity shops. We sometimes think they're not really being looked after. I wonder if there's any research done on the allowance of choice once you're in supported living or a residential home.
Yeah, there is. There are studies that have looked at choice, or not necessarily. Well, not specifically about clothes. Yeah, I think it was kind of a given that once people left institutions, once they're in the community, it was like you can choose your own duvet and, you know, the curtains, and you're now able to choose your own clothes. But I think it's probably been kind of looked over in terms of the actual research, whether or not specifically about clothes and what that means to individuals has, you know, and more in-depth sort of studies about that. I think really, especially with the qualities, you know, the kind of quality of life questionnaire sort of things, and people and life experience checklists and things like that, you know, you'll get questions of, do you have choice, can you choose what you wear, and it's a kind of a tick box, but maybe there needs to be more research into actually what is really happening around this specific, which is very important to you. You know, you get up in the morning, you decide what you're going to wear. I mean, clearly I decided what to wear for today, but you do, you know, those sorts of things we take for granted, don't we? And whether or not that's really happening and really being supported, we don't really know. So I think that's where we'd like to kind of maybe expand this a little bit more.
Right, okay, so it's really all very interesting. So if you would like to have a chat, please join us for some wine. And just would like to thank you, and you guys as well for coming. And